Turns out that this entire month I have been trapped in a virtual world so that the Cheshire Cat can slowly drive me insane by making me review all these Alice in Wonderland adaptations. And I hate to say it, but I think it's working. I think it's working. Shut up. Stay focused, man. God, I'm losing my mind, but I have to keep going. The only way out is through. If there was ever a film to push me to the brink of insanity, it's Disney's Alice Through the Looking Glass. Regardless of whether you loved or hated the Tim Burton version, this sequel will almost certainly infuriate you beyond all recognition. Why? Why? Because it has nothing to do with Through the Looking Glass! I mean, nothing! No thing! And what's actually here on the screen is insufferable! You know what this film is to me? It's the cinematic equivalent of the entire GDP of a third world country being flushed down the toilet. This film had a $170 million production budget, not counting marketing costs. This film is desperate, misguided, badly written, apathetic, infuriating, and has nothing to do with its source material.
I don't know who you are.
Now, to be fair, I've been the first to admit that Through the Looking Glass as a book isn't as good as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That's why there haven't been as many straightforward adaptations of the second book, and why so many elements of it get integrated into adaptations of the first book. Some degrees of expansion, narrative framing, combining, or reshuffling have been necessary in the past in the few versions of Through the Looking Glass we've seen. Tim Burton's film deviated pretty far from the source material and felt more like an adaptation of Jabberwocky starring the Wonderland characters. But they were able to have their cake and eat it too by calling it a sequel to the original Alice in Wonderland narrative, so the events from Alice's childhood all still happened. Yeah, it was a flimsy excuse, but it worked well enough to kind of justify the tired hero's journey and prophecy narrative, but Alice Through the Looking Glass strays as far as possible from the source material. It's more like an adaptation of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine mixed with a half-assed ripoff of Back to the Future Part 2 that somehow works in the Wonderland characters. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Disney was sitting on another script, possibly an adaptation of The Time Machine, and decided to morph it into an Alice in Wonderland sequel because the previous film was a huge hit and it has more brand name recognition.
That's logic.
I have no evidence to back that up, so I could be totally wrong, but that's really how it feels given how disconnected the finished product is from anything Alice in Wonderland related. This story is completely screwed from the get-go. Alice Kingsley is the captain of a trading vessel off the coast of China. That's right, Alice is a colonialist entrepreneur at a time when the British Empire was dominating China after the 2 Opium Wars. Better tear down her statues and cancel her on Twitter. When her ship is ambushed by some pirates, Alice pulls off an evasive maneuver that's so implausible that it makes the Pirates of the Caribbean movies look as grounded and realistic as Master and Commander. A criminally underrated film, I might add. Upon returning home to England, she finds that her father's company was bought out by Hamish, the aristocratic prick she stood up at the altar in the last film. He pressures her into giving up her ship in exchange for her family home, or else she and her widowed mother will be homeless. What a dick. This puts Alice in the uncomfortable situation of trying to hold on to as much of her father as possible, but having it all being taken away from her all at once. This sets up the film's themes of time slipping away from us, mortality, and our feeble efforts to change a past that is ultimately meant to shape us into the people we become. All of these are great themes on their own, but they're not executed well, and they're wholly inappropriate for an adaptation of Through the Looking Glass. The book had much more to do with the pressures associated with societal advancement, represented by the chess metaphor that runs throughout the entire book, and the nature of reality itself relative to the unconscious. But in this stupid story, Alice goes through the looking glass in a moment that kinda sorta resembles the book, but not really, and returns comes to Underland, only to find that the Mad Hatter is not quite himself anymore. He's in a funk because his family is missing, presumably dead, although he believes that they're still alive. Sensing a kindred spirit, given that she still misses her deceased father, Alice journeys to the home of Time, played by everyone's go-to eccentric character actor, Sacha Baron Cohen.
Nice.
She steals a device that controls time called the chronosphere, just go with it, and attempts to change the past, only to screw up each and every time in her attempts to fix what she feels went wrong. After going on a series of painfully tedious journeys throughout Underland's history, Alice comes to the conclusion that everyone who's ever seen or read any time travel story ever written has already come to before the movie even started, that you can't or shouldn't change the past. What kind of hyper-bizarre Mickey Mouse business is this? How in the hell did Linda Wolverton, the same screenwriter as the first film, get all this nonsense out of Through the Looking Glass?
There's been some debate about that.
Well, she didn't, but surprisingly enough, the justification for the time travel shit does have a textual basis. It's from a passage in the previous book, but at least it's in there. In Chapter 7 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, called A Mad Tea Party, the Mad Hatter refers to time as a person rather than a concept. The Hatter tells a story of how he tried to sing a song for the Queen of Hearts, but he was, quote, murdering the time, and now time won't do anything that the Mad Hatter asks. It's a pun. Laugh. So it's that tiny fragment from the first book, not the second, that tiny throwaway anecdote that forms the entire plot of this bloated, desperate excuse of a film. Desperate really is the key word here, which is really shocking given that almost all the key players from the first film returned to this one, except for Tim Burton. He didn't return as director, but he did stay on as producer. He was replaced by James Bobbin, who co-created one of my favorite comedy TV shows, Flight of the Conchords, and directed Disney's 2 Muppet feature films. He was a good choice, and I really don't chalk up the film's failure to him. I chalk it up to the baffling decision to center the entire story around a bizarre and poorly executed time travel plot. It doesn't help that almost all the returning actors give dull, uninterested, directionless, half-hearted performances. Almost none of them look like they know what they're doing or even that they care. A particularly heartbreaking example of this is, unfortunately, Johnny Depp. This was right around the time when his career was starting to go downhill, due in part to his alcoholism and his failed marriage to Amber Heard, which allegedly turned abusive. Normally, he pulls out a great performance even if the movie itself isn't that good, but the same cannot be said here. This is one of his worst performances by far.
Well, if I'm not, I wish I was. If we miss.
The light in his eyes seems to have gone out, and it's not hard to understand why, given all we know now.
I don't know who you are.
Helena Bonham Carter's performance is painful to watch. I mean simply excruciating. The relationship she has with time isn't funny, and their scenes stretch out way too long.
Isn't life wonderful, my dear?
It is, my love!
Speaking of whom, Sacha Baron Cohen's characterization of time is basically the same as the characters he's played in Hugo and Les Miserables, albeit with a German accent for some reason.
So being time, I must give some of myself for you to have me. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yes.
Really?
I personally love the guy, but he's at his best when he's doing improvised mockumentaries rather than scripted stuff. When he's in a scripted film, he just ends up playing the same quirky mustache-twirling bad guy that he's played in so many movies now. To her credit, Mia Wasikowska is the only person in this entire movie who's not only trying, but actually gives a better performance than she did in the first film.
You see, I used to think time was a thief, stealing everything I loved. But I see now that you give before you take, and every day's a gift.
Her performance before wasn't bad, but here she's much more emotive and less flat because her character has more maturity. But she also has greater degrees of fallibility and vulnerability without sacrificing the strong female character traits that Linda Wolverton prizes so highly. It's one of the few elements in this film that really does work. Speaking of which, another element that works is the visuals. Underland, isn't stylishly dark or creepy like it was in the first one, but it makes sense for it not to. The Jabberwocky has been slain, and a new day has dawned. Everything looks extremely bright and colorful, making this land look very appropriate for the title of Wonderland, except that they're calling it Underland. In fact, you could make the argument that the brighter and sunnier visuals provide an ironic counterpoint for the grief that our characters are going through. A lot of the times when people are going through depression, the outside world doesn't match their internal mood, and it can make their depression even worse. All of that would work wonderfully in a script that was halfway intelligent, which, unfortunately, this film does not have. Okay, being too negative, try to get it back to something positive. As good as the visual effects in the first film were for the time, they're even more stunning to look at in this film. Because the story takes place in broad daylight, you can see everything much better, and the environments really make an impact. So with all my bitching and moaning, you can no doubt tell that I am not a fan of this film. But I am not the only one who feels this way. Unlike its predecessor, Alice Through the Looking Glass was not a box office success and received very negative reviews from both critics and audiences. Disney must have known that they had a stinker on their hands, because I remember that they did not carpet bomb the landscape with a massive marketing campaign like they did with the first film. And more importantly, for our purposes, it wasn't a good adaptation, nor was it a good movie in its own context. It's nowhere near as cheap or deceptive as Alice of Wonderland in Paris, but it's just as infuriating for completely opposite reasons. Alice of Wonderland in Paris was a cheap, obscure piece of shit from the 60s that almost no one remembers or cares about. Alice Through the Looking Glass was a multi-million-dollar extravaganza from a major studio made by people who have a proven track record of success and oodles of talent. Did I really just say oodles? I really am losing my mind. Oh yeah, speaking of losing my mind, there's a scene in the middle of the movie that pisses me off so much that I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about it. So in her haphazard hopping through the space-time continuum, Alice ends up in a mental hospital, and for a minute, it seems like she actually might be trapped in an alternate reality where people think that she's gone mad. There have been numerous interpretations of Alice in Wonderland that have posited that the main character really is as mad as the Cheshire Cat always says she is. But this scene is so short and so pointless that it feels like the filmmakers are just teasing us with what we've all secretly wondered about the character, but it all amounts to just worthless filler.
I beg to differ.
You could easily cut it out of the movie and nothing of importance would be lost. Why is this scene here? Why was this movie made this way? Why?
There's been some debate about that.
There is nothing that drives me to the brink of insanity more than people who not only know better, but don't care and don't try to do their best with the film that they are making for millions of dollars. The modern filmmaking landscape, in the Hollywood mainstream anyway, is almost impossible to enter nowadays, and it's devoid of new ideas. Everything is an adaptation of something, and it's harder than ever to get original screenplays greenlit, even with big names attached. It breaks my heart when the few movies that do get made per year end up being so bad, especially when they're built on timeless classics like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And the sad part is that most people haven't even read those books. America has a serious problem with reading and education. But guess what? These books are in the public domain. The text is freely available to read online. I'll provide links to both books in the description below. I hope it inspires you to not just read these timeless books, but to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of these adaptations. That way, hopefully you, a creative person, can write your own Wonderland story and see why these stories matter so much. We could all use some more creativity and wonderment in this world, because without it, we really might as well go mad. Wait, that's it! It's working. He's embracing the madness.
Unhand him, foul feline fiend!
Well. It's good to see you again, Alice.
Cheshire Cat, Ravenger of Wonderland, I command you to leave this realm at once.
It's too late, my dear. And now, I'm afraid you'll have to die.
For sword power!
Scaramouche, please kill her.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world! Leave this realm forever, Cheshire, and I will spare your life. You have failed.
I haven't failed, my child. It was never about winning. Insanity is a dance, dear Alice. A dance that never ends. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance?
Oh, hello. How do you do? My name is Alice. Oh, right.
Thank you so much. How did you find me?
It's quite simple, you see. I followed the Cheshire Cat's heat signature that he left behind in the Borough Groves in the Tolgi Wood. Then, in the Montmorat's outgrave, and then... Oh, pardon me. I get like that sometimes. Care to discuss it over a cup of tea?
Sure. As long as I get to get out of this chair, right?
A few moments later.
Ah, much better.
Really? We couldn't have picked a different chair? I mean, we sprung for the nice soup, but we couldn't have picked the non-torture chair? I mean, come on, there's plenty of room.
Pardon me?
Never mind. So the Cheshire Cat, how did you find him? How did you find me?
To put it simply, the Cheshire Cat tried to turn me when I was a little girl. Now, I can sense him anywhere. I tracked him from Wonderland to this realm.
How did you defeat him when you were just a little girl?
I didn't. Sometimes I can still hear his laugh echoing in my brain.
How can I defeat the madness?
Madness never really goes away. You just learn to live with it.
That's it!
Pardon?
Don't you see? That's why we have stories. You know, they're meant to provide us meaning in turbulent times. They're meant to be rediscovered and reinterpreted by countless generations. They teach us important lessons about the world that we live in, lessons we can't otherwise learn. They're meant to provide meaning in an otherwise meaningless world. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry. Did you say something?
More tea.
Why, yes. Thank you.
Say, Alice, do you like surprises?